All right, so today we're diving into something that I think a lot of our listeners can relate to and probably have some pretty strong feelings about
Yeah.
in-law relationships.
Yeah, for sure.
For some people, it's like, they get married and they get this whole other like amazing supportive family.
Right.
But for others,
Yeah.
let's just say it comes with its own unique set of challenges.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when you marry someone or, even just start dating someone seriously, you're not just, entering into a relationship with that one person. You're kind of joining this whole other pre-existing, family system.
Right.
And that comes with all sorts of, dynamics that have been in place for years, sometimes decades.
Yeah, it's like you're suddenly part of this play that's been running for like 20 years and you haven't had a chance to rehearse your lines.
Exactly. And you don't even know what the plot is half the time.
Everyone else seems to know their role perfectly.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like you're trying to figure out who the protagonist is and who the antagonist is and who's just like a random character in the background.
Exactly. And sometimes you're not even sure if you're supposed to be like the comic relief or the tragic hero.
And then there are those moments where you realize, oh, maybe I'm actually the villain in this story.
Oh, yeah, that's always a fun realization.
Right. So in this deep dive, what we're going to do is really try to unpack some of these common dynamics that people experience with their in-laws. We've gone through a ton of stories, anecdotes, people sharing their experiences, and we're going to try to pull out some insights. Some things that maybe help us understand these situations a little bit better.
Yeah, I think what's so interesting is that even though everyone's situation is unique, there are these like recurring themes, these archetypes that keep popping up.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So let's start with like the classic one, right? The mother-in-law dynamic. I feel like that's the one that everyone has an opinion about.
Oh, yeah, it's like a cultural touchstone, right? The overbearing mother-in-law. It's practically a stock character in movies and TV shows.
Right. But I think there's a reason why that stereotype persists.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. You have this woman who has, poured her heart and soul into raising her child for years. They have this incredibly close bond. And then suddenly this new person comes along and in a way kind of usurps that primary role.
It's like you're suddenly competing for their attention and affection.
Right. And I think for some mothers, it can feel like a real loss.
Mhm.
They're not used to sharing that central place in their child's life.
And that can be really confusing for the person who's married to their child because, you're not trying to replace them.
Of course not. But it's not always about logic, right? It's about emotions. And those can be very powerful.
Yeah, and sometimes those emotions can manifest in some pretty interesting ways.
Oh, yeah. We came across some stories that were just like, wow.
Like one woman was telling us about how her mother-in-law constantly criticizes her cooking.
Oh, yeah. That's a classic.
But it's not just like, oh, this needs more salt or whatever. It's like these really specific comments about how her son, the husband likes his food prepared a certain way and how she's doing it all wrong.
It's like a passive aggressive way of saying, you're not taking care of my son the way I used to.
Exactly. And it's like he's a grown man. He can eat what he wants.
Right. But I think sometimes it's not even really about the food. It's about control.
Yeah. It's like a way of asserting their authority.
Exactly. And I think in those situations, it's really important for the couple to present a united front. To say, hey, this is how we do things in our household, and we respect your opinion, but ultimately we're going to make our own decisions.
Right. And it's about setting boundaries too, making it clear that there are certain things that are off limits.
Absolutely. And that can be tough, especially in the beginning, but it's so important for the long-term health of the relationship.
Yeah, because if you don't set boundaries early on, it can really create resentment down the line.
Exactly. And then you end up with this kind of simmering tension that can erupt at any moment. Right? And no one wants that.
Definitely not. So let's talk about another dynamic that can be pretty tricky, the sister-in-law relationship.
Oh, yeah, this one can be a minefield.
It really can. I mean, you have these two women who are both incredibly important to the same man.
Right. And they're often coming from very different places.
Exactly. The sister has this lifelong bond with her brother. They've shared so much history, and then this new woman comes along, and it can feel like a threat.
Like she's trying to steal them away.
Right. And I think sometimes there's also a sense of competition, who's closer to him, who understands him better, who can make him happier.
And it can get really intense, especially if the sister-in-law is used to being the primary woman in her brother's life.
Oh, yeah. You see that a lot,
Yeah.
especially if they're very close in age or if they were raised in a family where the siblings were really each other's main support system.
Like you're almost like a couple in a way.
Right. Exactly. And then when the actual romantic partner comes along, it can feel like a betrayal.
Yeah, and we heard some pretty wild stories about sister-in-law behavior. Oh, yeah. Like what?
Like one woman was telling us about how her sister-in-law would constantly try to undermine her in front of her husband.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, like she would make little digs about her appearance or her job or her cooking.
It's like she was trying to make her look bad so that the brother would think, oh, maybe I made a mistake marrying this woman.
Right. And it's so manipulative.
It really is. And I think in those situations, it's important for the husband to step up and say, hey, that's not cool. You need to respect my wife.
Absolutely. It's about setting boundaries and making it clear that this kind of behavior is not acceptable.
Right. And it's also about the wife feeling empowered to stand up for herself,
Yep.
to say, hey, I'm not going to tolerate this kind of disrespect.
Right. She doesn't have to just sit there and take it.
Exactly. And sometimes just calling it out can be enough. Sometimes people don't even realize that they're being hurtful.
Yeah. Sometimes they're just so used to relating to their brother in a certain way
Yeah.
that they don't even realize that they're crossing a line.
Right. And that's why it's so important to have open communication, to
Yeah.
talk about these things and to try to understand each other's perspectives.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you're all family now.
Right. You're all in this together.
So let's move on to another topic that can be a source of major stress: family gatherings.
Oh, yeah. The holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, those can be real battlegrounds.
It's like everyone's on edge.
Yeah.
There's this pressure to be happy and to get along, but then you have all these underlying tensions simmering beneath the surface.
Right. And you're often in close quarters for extended periods of time, which can just exacerbate everything.
And you never know what's going to set someone off.
It could be anything. A comment about the food, a question about when you're having kids, a perceived slight.
And then suddenly it's like World War III.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that makes family gatherings so tricky is that there are all these unspoken rules and expectations.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Like who sits where at the dinner table, who brings what dish, who's responsible for cleaning up.
And if you don't know the rules, you're bound to break them.
Exactly. And then you end up feeling like an outsider.
Yeah, like you're constantly being judged and evaluated.
And I think that's why it's so important to go into these gatherings with a plan, to talk to your partner beforehand and to figure out what the expectations are.
Right, and to set boundaries too.
Yeah.
To say, hey, we're only going to stay for a couple hours, or we're not going to discuss certain topics.
Absolutely, because you have to protect your own sanity.
Yeah, and it's also okay to take breaks,
Yeah.
to step away from the situation if it's getting too overwhelming.
Right. You don't have to be a martyr.
Exactly. So let's talk about some strategies for navigating these in-law dynamics, because it can't all be doom and gloom, right?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, at the end of the day, these are the people who love your partner and who are a part of your life, whether you like it or not.
Right, so it's worth trying to find a way to make it work.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most important things is to remember that you're not alone.
Right. A lot of people struggle with these same issues.
Exactly. And there are resources available. There are books, articles, therapists who specialize in family dynamics.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to reach out for help if you need it.
And it's also important to communicate with your partner, to talk about how you're feeling and to come up with a plan for dealing with challenging situations together.
Absolutely, because you're a team.
Right. And it's also important to remember that you can't control other people's behavior.
Yeah, you can only control your own reactions.
Exactly. So if your mother-in-law is being passive-aggressive, you can't force her to stop.
But you can choose not to engage with it.
Right. You can just let it roll off your back.
And sometimes that's the best way to maintain your own peace of mind.
Absolutely. And it's also important to focus on the positive.
Right. Try to find the things that you do appreciate about your in-laws.
Exactly. Because even if they drive you crazy, sometimes they're still a part of your family.
And they probably have some good qualities too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So try to find the humor in this situation.
Yeah.
Try to see the good in people.
And remember that at the end of the day, it's all about love.
Yeah, it's about creating a family that is supportive and loving, even if it's not always perfect.
Exactly, because let's face it, no family is perfect.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the main takeaway is that navigating in-law relationships can be challenging, but it's not impossible.
Right. It takes effort and communication and a lot of patience.
But it's definitely worth it.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, these relationships can enrich your life in so many ways.
Yeah, and they can also teach you a lot about yourself.
Right, about your own boundaries and your own values.
So embrace the journey, even the messy parts.
And remember that you're not alone.
We're all in this together.
Absolutely.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, see them?
And one final thought for you to consider as you navigate your own in-law relationships. Think about the legacy you want to create within your family.
Right. What kind of example do you want to set for your children and for future generations?
Because the dynamics that you establish now will have a ripple effect for years to come.
So choose kindness, choose compassion, and choose love.
Because in the end, that's all that really matters.
Absolutely.